What if I told you that the greatest violinist of all time was once accused of murder? That his concerts drove audiences into hysteria, convinced they were witnessing the devil himself? And that the violin he played, a Guarneri del Gesù known as Il Cannone, still survives today, resting in Genoa like a weapon locked in its case? Niccolò Paganini wasn't just a musician, he was a phenomenon. He revolutionized violin playing, terrified his rivals, and built a legend so powerful that 2 centuries later his name still means the impossible. Tonight we enter the life of Paganini, the man, the myth, and the violin that roared.
Paganini's story isn't only about genius. It's about how one artist with one instrument could change the course of music history. And it shows us something essential, that the soul of a violin is inseparable from the musicians who play it.
Niccolò Paganini was born in Genoa in 1782 into a modest family. His father Antonio was a dock worker who also played mandolin for pleasure. Antonio soon discovered that his son had an unusual gift. By the age of 5, Niccolò was already studying the mandolin and soon after the violin. But Paganini's childhood was no fairy tale of prodigy and praise. His father was relentless, forcing him to practice for hours on end, sometimes shutting him alone in a room until he mastered his exercises. What could have crushed another child instead fueled Paganini's intensity. From the beginning, music for him was not only an escape, it was survival. By age 11, he gave his first public concerts in Genoa. His reputation spread quickly. The boy could do things with the violin that no one else dared attempt. His fingers flew across the strings with a freedom that seemed almost supernatural.
From the very start, Paganini wasn't just imitating tradition, he was breaking it. His early performances showed glimpses of the fire that would later ignite all of Europe. And this reminds us, every great violist doesn't just inherit the past, they redefine it.
In 1797, as French troops occupied Genoa, the Paganini family fled to the countryside. Even amid political upheaval, young Niccolò's talent only deepened. Soon, he was invited to study with the finest teachers in northern Italy. But one by one, they confessed they had little left to teach him. By his teenage years, Paganini was composing and performing with a brilliance that shocked audiences. Yet alongside this brilliance came shadows, delicate health, nervous ailments, and a restless spirit that already seemed haunted. By the time Paganini reached his late teens, his fame had already spread across northern Italy. He performed with dazzling brilliance, astonishing audiences with feats no violinist had attempted before. Rapid-fire arpeggios, soaring harmonics, and even entire pieces played on a single string. But Paganini's life was never one of steady discipline. He gambled, he drank, and had a busy life that drained his purse and reputation. At one point, he lost his violin in a game of cards. It was then that fate intervened. A French merchant in Genoa lent Paganini a precious violin, a Guarneri del Gesù made in 1743. Paganini's playing so overwhelmed him that he refused to take it back. He told Paganini, "This violin is yours, it belongs to you." That Guarneri would become Paganini's voice, his weapon, his canon.
What made these instruments so extraordinary? Guarneri del Gesù's violins are known for their raw power. Darker, wilder, more explosive than Stradivari. In Paganini's hands, this wasn't just a violin, it was a force of nature. And this tells us something crucial. Instruments are not passive objects. In the right hands, they become personalities, voices, even legends.
Audiences soon gave it a name, Il Cannone, the canon, because its sound was like a roar, a blast that shook the concert halls of Italy. Paganini and Il Cannone became inseparable. He once said, "I do not play the violin plays me." By the 1820s, Paganini was no longer just an Italian sensation. He was preparing to conquer Europe. In 1828, he arrived in Vienna. What followed was nothing short of hysteria. The Viennese press called it Paganini fever. Concert halls overflowed, crowds fought for tickets, and publishers scrambled to print his music. Women fainted at his performances, others swore he was possessed. From Vienna, he swept through Germany, then Paris in 1831, where he became an idol for the Romantic generation. Writers like Heinrich Heine compared him to a sorcerer. Musicians like Liszt and Berlioz sat in awe. When Paganini reached London, his fame and the price of admission soared higher still. For many, hearing him was a once-in-a-lifetime event. His slender figure, cadaverous face, and wild playing gave him the air of something not quite human.
Imagine this. A single violinist with no microphone, no amplification, filling Europe's largest halls and leaving audiences trembling. Paganini was not just playing concerts, he was redefining what it meant to be a virtuoso. And here's the most important point. Paganini made the world believe that the violin was limitless. That legacy still drives every violinist and every violin maker today.
But Paganini's success was double-edged. His health worsened with the exhausting tours. Critics accused him of trickery. Some even claimed he had sold his soul to the devil. The myths multiplied, and with them his legend grew. By the height of his fame, Paganini was no longer just a musician, he was a myth. In truth, much of this legend came from his appearance. Paganini was tall and skeletal, with long fingers, hollow cheeks, and sunken eyes. He often played in black, his hair hanging loose, his face pale under the stage lights. But the reality was simpler and perhaps sadder. Paganini suffered from fragile health throughout his life. Chronic illnesses, probably tuberculosis and a hereditary connective tissue disorder, left him thin and weak. He often cancelled concerts due to illness, and his eccentric appearance was shaped as much by pain as by art.
This is where the legend and truth collide. Paganini wasn't the devil's violinist. He was a man, frail, sick, and human. But here's the paradox. His suffering may have fueled his genius. His long, flexible fingers gave him extraordinary reach on the violin. His illness gave him haunted aura that audiences never forgot. As violin makers and musicians, we see it clearly. Greatness often comes with imperfection. The flaws of a man can become the fire of a legend.
Among all the stories of Paganini's life, one figure stands beside him as inseparable, his violin. The 1743 Guarneri del Gesù, given to him by the French merchant, soon earned its name Il Cannone, for the explosive power of its sound. It was said that in Paganini's hands, Il Cannone could whisper like a sigh or thunder like a storm. Its voice was darker, rawer, and more dangerous than the sweet elegance of a Stradivari. Paganini drew from its sounds no one believed possible, shrieking harmonics, cascading arpeggios, and entire passages played with breathtaking force.
When we speak of Il Cannone, we are not just talking about wood and strings. We are speaking of the spirit of Guarneri del Gesù, rough, untamed, and powerful. Paganini understood this. He didn't tame the violin, he unleashed it. And that's why Il Cannone is still here in Genoa, preserved as the most famous Guarneri of all. It isn't just a relic, it is a voice that shaped history. And what makes Il Cannone so extraordinary, even to us as violin makers, is the way Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù worked. Unlike Stradivari, who refined every curve and left the instruments with a polished precision, del Gesù had a freer hand. His arching is fuller, and the F-folds are cut more boldly. the corners less symmetrical, and the two marks remain visible. Even his varnish has a fiery depth, applied in a way that feels almost instinctive rather than calculated.
Del Gesù came from the great Cremonese tradition, but by the 1740s he was working on the edge of it. His instruments broke the rules of elegance and refinement. Instead, they embraced power, individuality, and an almost raw energy. That is why Il Cannone sounds the way it does. Darker, wilder, and explosive. It's not an accident, it's the direct result of a maker who dared to work outside convention. And Paganini, with his unrestrained genius, found in that freedom the perfect partner. Even today, Il Cannone remains one of the treasures of the musical world. It rests in the Palazzo Tursi in Genoa, brought out only on special occasions to be played by select violinists. More than 180 years after Paganini's death, it still roars. Paganini died in 1840 in Nice at the age of 57. Even in death, controversy followed him. His reputation as the devil's violinist was so strong that the church refused him a proper burial for years. His body was moved from place to place, almost as restless as the man himself, but if his body wandered, his legacy did not. Paganini's 24 caprices became the new scripture for violinists. Once thought unplayable, today they are the rite of passage for every serious player. His innovations, left-hand pizzicato, harmonics, ricochet bowing, playing entire pieces on one string, expanded the violin's language forever.
What Paganini gave us was more than a spectacle. He gave us possibility. He proved that the violin could speak with voices no one had imagined before. And every violinist since, from Liszt's piano to modern virtuosos, has lived in the wake of his example.
And through it all, Il Cannone remains. More than just Paganini's violin, it is the last living witness of his fire. Preserved in Genoa, guarded like a national treasure, it connects us to the moment when one man and one instrument became indistinguishable. Niccolò Paganini was more than a man. He was a force that shook music to its core. His genius, his suffering, his myths, and above all his violin, Il Cannone, created a legend that endures 2 centuries later. Today, that same violin rests silently in Genoa. Yet every time its strings are touched, it roars again, carrying Paganini's spirit into our own time.
Paganini showed us that a musician and an instrument can become one. And this is the journey we are on in this series, to uncover the lives of the greatest artists and the instruments that shape them. Because behind every legend, there is always an instrument. And Paganini was only the beginning. Next, we'll meet the violinist many still call the most perfect player who ever lived, Jascha Heifetz. His Stradivari, his Guarneri, and his uncompromising pursuit of perfection. Join us as we continue exploring the untold stories of musicians and their violins.